Hello everyone, welcome to the new episode of Professionals Unplugged. I'm your host Utkarsh Shukla and let me introduce you to my guest Pennie. Pennie, thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you.
So let's start with our
My
very
name,
yeah, okay.
go ahead.
So you can introduce yourself. I was going to ask the same question only.
No, okay.
Yeah.
My name's Pennie Saum, she, her pronouns. I work in process improvement in government in Washington State for my day job. And my passion is a nonprofit that I started to prevent and advocate for child abuse survivors.
That is something I think there is something that needs to be addressed, right? The child abuse thing that you have mentioned. So can you share your story, like how you end up being doing this thing, and is there any story for the same? So anything on this?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a survivor of incest, and my brother is as well. And so I decided that once I was able to tell my story, which took quite a while, that I would create a space so other survivors could also find a way to unleash their voices, as well as do training for prevention. Because I think one of the problems we have in our country specifically is nobody wants to talk about these subjects. They're kind of taboo. And so the ability to talk about them, the ability to learn about them allows us to prevent children from being harmed. And as adults, we show up in the world with whatever lived experiences we've had. And so we have a lot of trauma in the workplace because a lot of people have been through a lot of things. And so really trying to highlight that out, help people break free of that trauma. And those are things that really, really have been super important to me. And one story I'll share is I was working really hard to get permission to do a TED Talk somewhere. And I had done hundreds and hundreds of interviews. And one gentleman said, why do you want to talk about this? You just want people to talk about it in the grocery store, like just over the oranges? And that's kind of became my phrase, is like, yes, I want everyone to be talking about this and preventing this over the oranges in the grocery store. So that's how every day we want it to become, because I think the more that we talk about it,
Yeah.
the more even the offenders and the abusers will be pausing and wondering, what are they doing? Why are
Yeah.
they doing it? So that's kind of my funny story about over the oranges in the grocery store.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. Like the more you talk about the things, the more you want to know about those things, right? Like how things happen and how they can be prevented. So that's a very valid
Absolutely.
point, I think, to educate people rather than educate people, to let people know that yes, there exists something called as child abuse, right? And that can be prevented. Right? So there is also kind of misconception where child abuse, people think it only as a beating, or sometimes people take it as a sexual abuse only. So can you just enlighten us on the same, like what are the different types of abuses and how they can be prevented?
Absolutely. So, definitely those are the most common people will hear about, right? Children being beaten, children being sexually abused. But there's also emotional abuse, and grooming, adults who kind of give presents and become friends. And, you'll see this a lot in the teenage years where it's really cool for a teacher to think I'm so special.
Hmm.
And that's what we call grooming. It's a very, very psychological game, if you will. And adults who do this also do that to the families so they can kind of make their way in and get people to trust them. And that's how they end up breaking down the system and abusing a child. So you have the emotional abuse, the grooming, and then neglect. Not getting children out of situations of harm. If you live with an alcoholic and you don't do anything about it, you're exposing that child to this trauma over and over and over, and they're learning life skills, even though you don't realize it, of survival and lack of safety. And so neglect and sexual abuse, emotional abuse, grooming, incest, of course, is sexual abuse by a family member. And what we're seeing an increase of since COVID is peer on peer abuse. And we're doing a lot of education right now about this because it's really, really important, where a child who maybe has a little bit more power than the other child will
Hmm.
take control, will abuse them, could be sexually, could
Hmm.
be manipulation,
Yeah.
and could be control, like kind of forcing them to do things. So there's a lot of different ways that children are taken advantage of.
So what is the procedure to avoid it? Because most of the children they get afraid, like they will be they will be scolded by their parents and they won't be allowed to go out. Like these are the cases that I generally see here in my place, right? So what is the solution to it, right? I mean anything
Yeah,
on the
so yeah, one of the big things for children is teaching them the right names for their body parts,
uh,
assuring that they know and can speak the language that they need to be able to say that something's wrong. Another story we have is we had a child who went to school and said, "Daddy ate my cookie." And no one understood that it meant
yeah,
something way more than eating a cookie. So education of our children, talking to our children, respecting their boundaries. If they don't want to be hugged or kissed, they don't need to hug and kiss other people if that's not what they want, or tickling. All of those things can take advantage. And then also never leaving a child alone with an adult individually. So piano lessons, an adult should be around. Sports events. Don't let a coach take a child off to a locker room to have a private conversation. Rules of 2 and 3, and making sure that children are always protected with more than one person around. And the same thing with the children on children situation we're seeing is teachers not having spaces where kids could be alone. It's really, really important. Kids are seeing more today. They have access to more with the internet and cell phones and smartphones. And we're seeing an increase in this because of what they are seeing. So it's really, really important. The adults are the ones with the developed brains, and we have to help children with boundaries. For parents to say, my child needs privacy. I don't want to look at their phones. I don't want to do this. No, their brains aren't developed till you're at least 24, 25 years old. Us as adults need to be the responsible parties and not be friends, be adults that we need to be.
yeah. I think that's a very good point. Like you just don't need to be friend with your kids or kids at your home, right? You need to play a part as a mentor or as you said as an adult to them, right? Rather than just let them do whatever they want to, but you need to have an eye on them, right? And overview, or you can say an over eye on them to see what's going on with them or with their systems or with their mobiles, right? Because as you have mentioned, that today's internet and the ease to use things right now is pretty much easy for everyone to use, correct? So yeah, that's a very valid point, I think, that you have just mentioned here as well. So one of the abuse that you mentioned is an emotional abuse, right? So anything on it because I have heard it for the first time. So I'm just curious to know more about it.
Yeah. It kind of falls in line with the grooming as well, emotional abuse. Um, but the second part of it would be belittling, um, telling a child that they're ugly, telling a child that they're fat, making them feel less than, utilizing your space or place as an adult to kind of control this child through verbal language. And uh, like the best way I can explain it is to like break someone's spirit down to where they feel like they're nothing. And I don't want to say it's as high as sexual abuse, but during COVID, we saw it a lot when children were home with potentially their abusers, because 90% of children who are abused know them, family members, cousins, neighbors, whatever. And so we saw that a lot. You're nothing. You're not worth anything. You're never going to be anything. You're fat. You're ugly. You're this. You're that. And those things just tear down people. We imagine what it does to adults. So imagine what a child who doesn't, and this person that they love. So it's just a very it's not psychologically safe, and it's really, really important that kids, yes, they need to be corrected, but they don't need to be belittled and put down. And that's where we find those things break kids down, and they end up having problems in school. They end up having problems in life because those things, the way, and Karen Ross and I talked about this, is when something negative happens to you or negative is said to you, it sticks to you like Velcro.
Yeah, correct.
Right? It's like you're walking around with labels on you. And but when good things happen, when positive things happen, because it's, not, it feels good, it kind of slides off like Teflon. You hear it and you're building yourself up. And so these negative things they stick and they don't go away, especially when a child hears it over and over and over. So it's just really important about positive reinforcement and encouragement so that we can raise amazing adults in our universe.
Yeah, I think, and the same thing is also valid for teenagers as well. Uh, Not for just for child. I think as a teenager also people faces this kind of problems. And so, is your organization also for teenagers or it's like for kids only right now? Oh, I mean, what's the
Oh,
main
you cut
purpose?
out right there. What was that?
So the organization or the work that you're doing, so it's for kids or like it's for both kids and teenagers. How is it working?
Both, because
Both.
teenagers, as we know, mental health and depression and suicides in America anyway is higher than it's ever been. And so they're getting this like emotional abuse through social media, right? They're being attacked by their friends,
Yes.
they're being attacked by businesses saying this is what a good body looks like. And then they get it at home too. Then those kids who are already struggling to just make it through that awkward teenage years makes it even worse. And so it's absolutely, I would say from 0 to 25 and adulthood too, right? We
And
need to hear
right,
gratitudes and
correct.
kindness, but teenagers are really a core point with what's going on in the world right now.
Yes, that's correct. So what is your dream right now? Like professional dream, you can say.
Yeah. One dream that we've been able to kind of make a reality is what I call soul fire healing weekends. And we've been able to bring together some amazing professionals to make space for women to come together and heal in community and realize they're not alone and unleash their voices. In October, we're doing one with Karen Ross. It's going to be fabulous. Um, but my big dream is this is really big, is prison reform.
Isn't
And California is doing a very good job about finding out what happened to a person and looking at a holistic person who ends up in jail or prison over and over. And in my state in Washington, we're not doing this. It's not doing a good job. And the reason this is really important to me is my brother, who was severely abused, um, ended up in the system and with a very high recidivism rate to prison and jail. And no one ever asked him what happened to him as a child. No one looked at this human and said, why are you still here? Why are you coming back? What's going on? Who are you? And there's a score called Adverse Childhood Experiences score. And I really think that adult serving programs, drug centers and resources, prison systems, organizations that help reentry of people coming out of prison really need to stop and start thinking about the holistic person. And we need to solve the problem from there, the root causes, and how to heal those people, or we're going to continue to see the recidivism rates that we have. And so my big dream is to really do that kind of work in Washington State. And I think that it's a great opportunity for the school to prison pipeline and these youth who end up in the system that need to be stopped way early, like we talked about with the emotional abuse, as well as young people and people of color. You know, all the numbers that we see that are higher than other things really need someone to understand who they are and spend time doing that. So that's my big dream.
Yeah, I mean, having a holistic approach while dealing with people who have ended up in crimes and knowing their past as well can play a key role in helping them to be a better person. I think that's a very valid to be done to them, rather than just considering them as a criminals or hey, you have committed this crime. There will not be any past story related to you, right? Because I think everything should be considered by judging a person, because at the end if someone is committing a crime they are going to be judged at a court, right? So knowing their back history, knowing their traumas, I think these things play a key role. And as you mentioned, I think this is something all of the world rather than a state, I can say. Right? So
Absolutely.
that's a
Most
really
definitely.
interesting thing, right? So that's really awesome. So I have one more question. Like, it takes really courage to do such things, right? To talk about child abuse and create an organization out of it. So, how you have managed, like, as you have shared your journey, like you were a victim of the same, right? So, how did you have that courage, or how do you manage to gather that courage to start your own organization that is now helping? So, just a little bit enlighten us.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Um, it was kind of twofold. One, my brother was the brave one. He was the one that spoke up first.
Hmm.
And I always thought maybe I do think if it was just me, probably would not have spoken up for a really, really, really long time, way longer than I already had. Um, the second thing that happened was when I wanted my brother to know that he wasn't alone. And that's where I decided once he spoke up that, and this is really terrible to say, because I was the oldest one, I feel like I failed him. But I wanted him supported and I didn't want anyone to not believe him. So it was really important that at that moment that I was able to speak up on his behalf and my behalf. And our mother, when she knew better, she did better and she stood up for us and took the action she needed to when we disclosed to her. And so then from there, I shared my story in little bits. But when my mother passed away, the reason I only shared it in little bits is because I didn't want my mother to hurt more than she already had. She already felt so much guilt that this had happened in her home, although he groomed all of us, so he was very strategic. That when she passed away, I knew that I had to tell my story on a broader scale. I started the Brave and Unbroken Project, and it was also kind of on the heels of the Me Too movement, but Me Too felt as though it was more of a stage, more for famous people,
Yeah, right.
So how did we bring this platform down for the everyday person? And because as I was telling my story to people, they were saying, me too. That happened to me. I've never told anybody. It's been this long. It's been this long. And I had a 70-year-old woman who said, I've never spoken this ever. And it would happen when she was 10, so that was 60 years later. And so it was really important to me that we found ways to help people unleash their voices earlier so that they could change the trajectory of their lives and become
Mm.
thrivers. And that's where Brave and Unbroken really started. We had the prevention work that we were doing, and then how do we continue to help people find their voices? So the Soul Fire Healing Retreats, Zoom meetings with survivors. We're working on a stage play to just like bring it to the forward. And so that's kind of how it all started. And then the Soul Fire Healing Retreats, it's like women needed space to come together and have a community. Whether it be through art, we had an art weekend, whether it be through really deep somatic, movement and therapy work. But we really needed to bring a community together so people knew they weren't alone. And that's kind of how it all evolved.
That's really great. I think you tried to try every possible way. Like as you mentioned, having community meets, Zoom for speaking with the people who have suffered the same. So it's like you are trying to break the cycle so that the events does not repeat themselves and same thing doesn't happen again and again. That's a very, I think I can say, a impressive approach that you are trying to follow, like getting people to speak at the younger age rather than, as you mentioned, a 70-year-old woman speaking after 60 years, right? So I mean, this is something that needed to be done, and it's really amazing to see you doing that thing. So that's quite impressive
Yep.
for me as well, right?
Thanks. We're doing it on a very small scale compared to how many people are out there, but we figure our little ripple is going to impact some folks.
And
We're going to break some generational trauma and hopefully make our communities a better place.
yeah, I think everything is small from that very little steps that we have taken. Like you have mentioned, you started from Me Too movement, and now it's getting greater and greater. And I hope your voice will be heard from all over the world soon. Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, awesome, Penny. I think we are done with this podcast, or you can say interview. Thank you so much for your insights. I hope it will help a lot of people to speak about themselves and they can come and talk to you if they have something related to this, right?
That'd be great. Thanks so much, Utkarsh, for having me.
Thank you, Penny. Bye.